Now let's talk about Gen Y. Gen Y, this is their hero. Colbert and The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. They get their news not from CBS, NBC, or ABC. They get their news from The Daily Show with Jon Stewart and from the Colbert Report, which is fine because it's actually the most accurate news there is. Generation Y, the millennials. The problem we have is that how do we get the millennials to focus on our evidence and to listen to us when they won't even talk to each other or listen to each other? These are people who sit across the table from each other and text each other instead of talking. I was giving this speech to the ABA, about 500 people in the room, and there was a young man on the front row, and I said, okay, do you have a significant other that you can reach by phone right now? He said, yes. I said, okay, would you be so kind as to call her? So he calls, and the phone ring, 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 ring. Nothing. So he hangs up. I said, okay, wait for it. Wait for it. Ding. Text message. I said, okay, don't tell me, let me guess. It says, what's up? And he said, yeah, that's what it says. I said, well, pick up the phone and call her and tell her, or I guess you'll have to text her and tell her that what's up is I want to talk to you on the telephone, which is why I called you on the telephone. They won't talk to each other. They don't listen to each other. So what in the world makes you think they're going to listen to you and me? So let's talk about how we can get the millennials to focus on our evidence. First of all, we have to achieve focus. We have to understand what motivates this generation. It's all about show and tell. Third grade school teachers could teach us so much as trial lawyers because they understand show and tell very well. But with this generation, and all generations actually, it's mostly show. So we talk about some standard focus techniques as to how you focus your message. Now the demographics of the millennials. They're born between 82 and 02. Their ages are, at the moment, are 12 to 32. They're the children of the boomers. They're the siblings of the Xers. Now, the reason they are just completely high-tech. 94% have cell phones, 76% use instant messaging, and 92% multitask and messaging. They're the second largest population. There's 75 million of them. 38% identify, self-identify as white. They're more liberal and more democratic than ever before. And 50% of these folks are entering college, so they will be the most educated generation in our history. They are different. The reason they call themselves millennials is because they graduated from high school in the year the first batch of them graduated from high school in the year 2000. So they tag themselves the millennials as opposed to Generation Y. But look at this. You're talking about a case where you've got a plaintiff who's got the inability to find a job now that he's been injured. Well, you know, it's again, welcome to our world. Their unemployment rate is 20%. They have less health insurance. They have the highest rate of obesity. They have concerns regarding their own declining health. And they feel, here's where they differ completely from Gen X. They feel that the federal government should do more for them, and all governments should do more for them. Gen X is the one that has the signs saying, keep your hands off, the federal government, keep the federal government's hands off my Medicare. They have an adverse view of business, which means that they're intelligent. They want a job with self-esteem. They're heavily burdened with school debt. And they're so heavily burdened with school debt this is where a major part of the resentment comes against politicians and against the banks and against the corporations who bought up their notes and who now hold their school debt. A lot of these folks who graduate from college today have $150,000, $200,000 school debt that they have to deal with, and they're looking at that in the face of a 20% unemployment rate. So they're a burdened generation. They're living, which is one of the reasons why they're living with their parents longer. They have a closer relationship with their parents. They talk to an average of 1.5 times per day on a wide variety of topics with their parents. They accept authority because they're living with their parents longer, they're staying in their household, they're relying on their parents heavily. But these folks were taught to accept authority too because of the way they were raised. The millennials were raised from the time they could walk. They were put into groups. They were put into teams. All their sports are organized, and they're taught from the beginning. They have to listen to the coach. If they don't listen to the coach, they don't get to play. So they're taught to respect authority right off the bat, and they're taught rules right off the bat. They're taught games with rules. Everything is done in organizations. Everything is done in leagues right off the bat, or just from their earliest time. And so they have to learn rules. They have to accept authority. They have to. They're used to, accustomed to being supervised, because they're supervised right from the crib on up. And so for this group, things like rules of the road are even more stronger. They're even more influential than with the Generation X people. Rules of the road resonate with them because they have rules for everything. Everything they've done is by rules. When I was a kid, we wanted to play football. We'd find the kid with the football, and then we'd go over to the schoolyard and we'd start up a game with a few people, and more people would see it, and they'd come gather in, and we'd choose up sides and we'd play. And we made our own rules, and we just made up our rules as we went along. We supervised ourselves. And I remember our rules were that when I was a kid, we leave the house in the morning in the summertime, we're not in school, and the rule was we had to be back home that night when the street lights came on. And that was it. No supervision, no rules. We did everything for ourselves. But this is precisely the opposite. Precisely the opposite. This is interesting. What they say are their events. This is what they choose as their events. They think the top 10 events that influence their lives are Columbine, understandable, the war in Kosovo, the Oklahoma City bombing, the death of Princess Di, who was an icon to this group, the Clinton impeachment, the O.J. Simpson trial, which was thrown in their face on television for a whole year, the Rodney King riots, the Lewinsky scandal, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the McGuire-Sosa home run race, which I thought was kind of funny. But that's what they regard as the 10 top events on a survey, the 10 top events of their life. They're self-identifiers. This is how they describe themselves. Positive attitudes, cooperative team players, which is obviously true, accepting of authority, which is true, rule followers, which is obviously true, the most supervised, which is obviously true. Again, this is self-identification. They say they're smarter. And to a large extent, they're basing this on the fact that, I don't know, maybe the fact that they have to teach their grandfather how to use a computer. They have to teach their father how to use an iPhone. Maybe they are. I mean, they're certainly smarter technologically. They're more progressive. This millennial thing bodes well for democratic politics and for progressive politics because they are progressive. And these folks, to a very large extent, between their votes, but also their get out the vote efforts and their individual campaigning, these folks, to a very large extent, put President Obama in the White House. They regard themselves as cutting edge, and they are on technology. They teach us technology. They're better educated, 50% going to college, and they're global. They don't have the local perspective. They don't have the statewide perspective. They don't have the national perspective. They have a global perspective on life because of, obviously, the World Wide Web. Now, they're nearly polar opposites of the boomers, who are their parents. They're nearly polar opposites of the Xers, who are their siblings. And they're not, this is important for us, these folks are not as susceptible to tort reform as the Xers. For one thing, obviously they're smarter, but they're just not, they won't buy this bill of goods. They're more progressive. But also, today, these people are getting more and more educated, and more people are filling the graduate programs and the law schools, and more of their people it's their goal to get a law degree, or their friend's goal to get a law degree, and they know a lot of very good friends of theirs who are in law school, and they're finding out we're not such bad folks after all. The 12 key negative events in their lives. These are the cohorts that happen to this group, the millennials. 911, the dot-com failures influenced them, which gave them something of a bad attitude about business. Corporate corruption, which they've had thrown in their face their entire lives, literally. A divided country, which is getting worse by the day. The untrustworthy politicians, which is getting worse by the day. The Iraqi-Afghan wars, which they largely opposed, and that's just where they get their progressive views and their Democrat views, because the Democrats opposed, to a large extent, the Iraqi-Afghan wars. Their big event is their own lack of security. They don't feel secure because of things like the Oklahoma City bombing and all these things, and 911 that can happen to you at any time, any place, any way. They have shrinking salaries, which is a negative event. And then they see it as shrinking opportunities because so many jobs are being shipped overseas, the outsourcing of jobs being the next negative factor. And the insourcing of foreign workers. A lot of the foreign workers who are coming in are taking the jobs that they feel they should have. You have a lot of people coming in from countries like India who are taking a lot of the computer jobs at which they feel like they're particularly qualified. So insourcing of foreign workers, there are a huge number of foreign workers being insourced into the healthcare industry. And particularly since malpractice cases have been largely outlawed in a lot of states, you now have insources of foreign workers who will work in the healthcare industry much more cheaply than the American healthcare workers. And downsizing, being replaced by the computers that they love so much. So those are the key negative elements, events that they think have influenced their lives. So in terms of generic communication across the board to all these folks, it's like a newspaper article. They always taught us in journalism, you teach in your lead paragraph, you answer these questions: who, what, when, where, why, and how. And that's how we should prime our information in our stories. In our storytelling, you want to get their attention while they have a short attention span. If you don't grab these folks quickly, you won't grab them at all. So you take the story, the grabber in your story is who, what, when, where, why, and how, the 5 W's and how.